everybody. Welcome back to the Soulganize Your Life podcast. And I'm super excited to welcome one of my classmates from Concordia University of Chicago back in the COVID days, Marianne. Yeah, thanks for coming to the podcast. And Marianne, what we do on this podcast is pretty straightforward. We really just talk about the differences between how life will stimulate our inner environment, right? So the outer life is coming into our inner environment, and we're either stimulating our psychological ego or we are stimulating the divine soul connection that you and I feel so deeply within. And so, why do I think it's important to know the difference and to tell our clients about this? Is because, well, you as our guest is going to tell us your viewpoint on this, but really, we have this inner conflict within ourselves. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that and to talk about what those two things are. And then say, okay, so if I have this conflict within me, I'm going to try to integrate it to the best I can. And I need to become aware of both of them. I need to become aware of the ego and the divine soul connection that I am to all that is. And then I want to integrate those two perspectives into one full, beautiful human experience. And so I know that you know how to do this. And I appreciate you so much for being here. And, when we were classmates, I think you and I and one other, we like sort of bonded over like, let's move fast, let's get out there, let's start helping people. And, and I think we all support each other. And so I know that you're doing great work still. So thanks for being here and finish introducing yourself.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Wynn, for having me. Grateful to join you from sunny Florida. And my name is Marianne Dernlin. I am a wife, a mom, and a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. I'm also the founder and owner of Replenish and Renew Counseling that offers telehealth mental health counseling services across the state of Florida. I named my practice Replenish and Renew Counseling because I believe we all need continuous replenishment and renewal in our lives, but we often don't realize that until we're empty and run down. And so I'm excited to talk today about my views as a Christian and as a clinician, and how I think it's important to continue to replenish and renew our bodies and our minds and our souls.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think renewing really to me is a constant reminder that I am not just the ego, that I have, I have to remind myself every day through meditation or whatever aspect of study that I am engaging in to remember that I am not an ego, that I have one. It will trigger me. It will get smarter. It will continue to mess with me and want to direct my life. But if I renew my commitment every day to my soul, right, that is, there's a lot more to gain from that, and I think, even you and I going to a Christian-based college, I feel like we didn't talk about it. I feel like it was sort of off limits. There was no classes on it. It was kind of ironic. And, I love that we sort of at least kind of kept talking individually about the fact that this was important to us. And, and I don't know if you liked the word ego in school or if you identify with that or you call it something else. So I guess if you do use that word ego, or if you don't, you tell me the word you like to use that sort of talks about that sort of separate self and sort of how you first identified that you had one.
Definitely. Yeah. So preparing for this podcast, it was great to kind of really dig into the Bible and talk to some of my pastors and people that are have more expertise in God's word than I do. I've attended church for many years, but so I hear sermons, I take some notes, but I really wanted to dig in and get to the truth within the Bible about ego. And so I knew there were a lot of verses about flesh versus spirit. So for me as a Christian, I view the ego as the flesh, the fleshly desires, wanting to be comfortable at all times, instant gratification, not have to do anything hard to get what I want, right? Indulgence, overindulgence, right? All of those things. And the spirit being the part of us that is led by God if we choose to follow Christ, right? And surrender our lives. I had an awesome quote I found by John Piper, who was a pastor. This is from an article called The War Within, Flesh versus Spirit. And it's from 1983, but it's timeless, as everything in the Bible is. But he said, "The flesh is the ego, which feels an emptiness and uses the resources in its own power to try to fill it. Flesh is the I who tries to satisfy me with anything but God's mercy." Right? So as Christians, we come to that realization, I am truly nothing without Christ who died on the cross for my sins, right? We all fall short because we're human and broken and sinful, but our hope is that in Jesus, because he came to die for us so that we can one day spend eternity with God in heaven. And without Jesus, that's not possible, right? And without Jesus, I can't, the flesh and the spirit are always in contention. And until we acknowledge our inability to fight the flesh on our own and surrender some of that to God, we're going to live in this intense battle this side of heaven, right? Trying to say, I don't want to eat the extra thing, but I do it anyway. Or I don't want to yell at this person, but I do it anyway. Or I don't want to fill in the blank, right? Until we truly want to surrender our lives to Christ, be sanctified, meaning try to become more like him, even though we'll never be close. But, so I was thinking about it before I hopped on, conceptualizing, what do you want to do? Sit on the couch all day in your pajamas. What would God call you to do? Help your neighbor, right? And so even though you want to sit in your pajamas, you feel that conviction from the Holy Spirit going, your neighbor needs help or do the right thing, right? And so you're then motivated by that relationship with God to do it, not by your own power. You don't want to get off the couch. And yet you have this higher calling from God. And when you surrender your life to God, you're then able to be moved by the Spirit and not just of your own fleshly desires and of your own power.
Yeah, and that's how I know that we are loved by something bigger than us and as a creator, because it gives us a choice. It's like you can sit on the couch and not listen, or you can, hear the whispers of your soul, right? That it's not going to yell at you, to your point. And it's just an inner conflict, is an inner struggle that I think is worth talking about. And even in a personal manner, so how did you first become aware that you had an ego, or was it learning the word in school? Was it something you learned growing up as a Christian?
Yeah, I would say it was probably about 10 years ago when I started going to a non-denominational Christian church in Chicago, Park Community Church, shout out. Really good biblical teaching, awesome community with others just to learn about God's word. And really starting to understand, without Christ, we don't have that hope, right? We all fall short. Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, that brought sin into the world. And so, we all have that inherently within us, because sometimes we want to walk around and say, well, I'm a pretty good person, right? Did I do 3 bad things and 5 good things? Does it weigh out? And learning that's not how it works in God's eyes, right? And he sees everything. So he's also seeing the good stuff you do, you don't tell people, and the bad stuff you do, you don't tell people. And so just learning that there, is this part within us that we have to surrender over to be led by the Spirit in order to, do what God calls us to do on earth, be his hands and feet, love others well, do good works, love the poor, widows, marginalized people. We can't do that only of our own strength. We're too tired and burnt out. You have to be motivated. And as clinicians, right, we love what we do, and yet it's heavy work, right? And so we have to have a place to become rejuvenated, right? Become grounded, so that we don't continue to try to just push on by our own power and get burnt out, which is very common in our field.
Yeah. So personally, how would you have defined your ego at that point? You said when you became aware, what was your ego trying to achieve?
Well, I like the phrase I heard from one of my former colleagues in the recovery space. She said that the ego stands for edging God out. And so I think that I would have viewed it mostly based on pride, right? Like if I have an accomplishment, it's because I did it. I want recognition. I did the good thing, right? Even getting good grades in school. Like I want to get good grades for me. And then learning that if our audience can be truly God, which is a constant battle, right? But working on doing all of your work for God's glory and for him as your audience, then you're not constantly looking around. Is everybody giving me the affirmation I need? Is everybody, seeing all this stuff that I'm doing? And am I hiding the stuff I need to do better, good enough so nobody sees that, right? just
Yeah.
learning that it's not all about, doing things for your own gratification, but more, again, just for God's glory, and not just trying to seek to fill all of those fleshly, earthly desires from outside sources, knowing you can get a lot of what you need from your relationship with God and other believers around you.
Yeah. So you're saying that you recognize your own ego as being a good girl, wanting to do well, wanting other people to recognize that you are doing well. And that was a big part of, like you said, the word pride. How do you think that
Hmm.
as a kid because I don't think we're born with an ego. I think it develops from other egos. How do you think other egos taught you that pride was a good thing in the self and
Mm,
to achieve recognition from others was the way to be successful?
sure. Um, I would disagree a little bit that we're not necessarily born with an ego, only because the way I conceptualize it is flesh versus spirit, right? And we're
Mhm.
all born with that innate sinful nature.
Hmm.
Um, I know you don't have to teach. I like to say you don't have to teach a toddler to sin, right? Like they know to hide the time they colored on the wall. They know to try to sneak the snack and not let you see. They know to lie if they spill water all over the bathroom because they were playing with soap and water, right?
This sounds
Um,
personal, Marianne.
right?
Little kid.
I love my kids. But we even went over this in a Bible study I did many, many years ago in Chicago, where that's one of the leaders said. He said, "You don't have to teach a toddler to sin, right? They just know they want to hide something. They know something is shameful. They know something is might be wrong, and they don't want others to see it. And we all do that, right? Um, and I'll get back to your question, but I would think that we all are born somehow with that innate broken sinful nature that can turn into the desires of the flesh, that ego. Um,
Yeah, I guess how did
and
you uniquely form, right? So if you do believe that we're
mhm,
born with that, people have different looking egos, right?
right.
Some people subscribe to victimization, some subscribe to superiority, some subscribe to looking like the good girl, some subscribe to being the rebellion. Like, how do you think your
Hmm.
ego developed in yourself?
Yeah. Um, I definitely always was like a high achiever in terms of wanting to get those good grades, lead things that I was a part of.
Mhm.
Um, And so I think that gave me a lot of, affirmation and fulfillment that I was seeking from places other than God or healthy sources. And I've worked with clients too, adolescents who are high achieving. And
Yeah.
I like to talk with them about how having a goal of getting all A's or being class president or fill in the blank isn't a bad thing in and of itself. It's that if you're motivated by anxiety or fear of not being enough or not being loved or being not having enough worth or all those things, if you don't achieve those outcomes. Um,
Right. Right.
and so, um, yeah, I think that just came from, um, it's a place I got a lot of affirmation from others.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm guessing, you're being brought up by parents or, teachers that are like, you're a good kid and you're a good girl and you get good grades and like keep going, right? One of my clients told me yesterday, he said, I realized unconsciously that when I succeed, people like me. And
Mhm.
I mean, he took that all the way into his 30s, and
Yeah.
it's not untrue, right? That
Mhm.
is not untrue. But we're more than that. And I think the next question I have for you is when did you or did you always realize that you were more than this pursuit, this high achiever?
Mhm.
Or was that something that you kind of had a dark night of the soul moment where you're like, I'm this isn't gonna work long term?
Right. Well, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and my conceptualization of like, are you a good person or not, came a lot from the structure of like giving a confession, right? You can go give a
Mhm.
confession, you're told certain actions to take, prayers to pray, and then you're absolved of those sins. And when I started pursuing, looking at the Bible and Christianity on my own, um, and learning that, we can get fulfillment, complete forgiveness of our sins if we repent, right, from God and turn away from sin and all those things. That was a stark contrast from the religion that I was raised in.
Mhm.
And so I feel like again when I started really connecting to my faith individually when I moved to Chicago, is when I realized, oh, I can't do this on my own. I'm not good enough without Jesus. Like, I can't just do all the things, get all the praise, and I'm not living the way the Bible would encourage me to. And I look at the Bible as, some people can view it as a lot of rules of things to do and not do. And I like
Mhm.
to look at it as, we often describe Jesus and God as a shepherd, right? And we're all sheep. And what does a shepherd do? He puts a fence up, like a healthy boundary to know, for the sheep to know, don't go over here, right? You'll get eaten by a wolf, or like you'll fall off this cliff. So sometimes we view boundaries or rules or things that we encounter with a spiritual awakening sometimes as, oh, now I can't do that thing, or now I shouldn't do X, Y, and Z that I used to love to do. And I like to view it as, a loving parent saying, don't go over there, don't do this thing. This is the way to live in which you can have more connection with me, with God the Father, and a
Mhm.
better way to show your love to other people around you. And again, you can't do this all on your own. You can't just be fueled by your fleshly desires or your ego. You
Yeah.
have to be surrendered and be led by the Spirit if you want um, to, you know, live within God's will for your life as best you can. It's not something you can perfect. Um, but I think it was that reckoning of like, oh, wow, I really can't do this on my own, whether it's get the praise, do the thing, whatever the
Yeah.
case is. I pursued my faith all throughout, college, but it was this deeper level of, um, being at a church, being single, moving to a new city. I moved from New Jersey to Chicago. I knew barely anyone. And so really just also relying on God to get me through that time um, was that big shift for me from, it's not just stuff I do, I have to also submit.
Okay. So it wasn't, I think some egos, might get resentful of the fence, right?
Hmm.
And the shepherd, right? And so what you're saying is the way that you started to recognize the deeper truth of who you were was you kind of were forced to, like, I moved, I was by myself. I didn't really have all these people around me that were telling me how great I was anymore. And so it helped you, accidentally or not, to deepen your faith. And like, if I, maybe consider that I'm more than this, high achiever, good girl, um,
Hmm.
and dive deeper in, that I might actually feel a higher sense of peace or understanding. Or like, were you suffering? Were you looking to escape your suffering, or were you just thinking like there's more to life? What drove you towards a more soul-based perspective?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I came to know and love Jesus my senior year of high school, so 2011. But then in college, I was pursuing my faith, but more on my own, not in community with others. So I wasn't going to a church like every week per se. And so once I started doing that, when I moved to Chicago, I just knew I have to get more connected to God. This is going to be a way I can ground myself healthily in this new place, in this new city, and I just was craving that community as well. And that's also the community where I met my husband. I was at that church
Oh,
through my Bible study. Um, and so God obviously led me there. And so, yeah, it was this reckoning of, I'm in a new place. I was, and I just knew that was what I needed to do. I knew I needed to get more connected and learn more about the Bible and all of those things. If I was claiming to be Christian and following some of the stuff, I kind of understood, right?
mhm.
I knew I just needed to be more ingrained in that. And now as a clinician, I also, with my clients who are Christian and want to include that in their counseling sessions, I view it as very important for myself to continue to be studying the word and Christian
Mm.
resources and all of those things. Um, and I always just pray before sessions, right? Like, God, please give me the words to say to this client. Please let this be for your glory, not for mine, right? Not that I said the right thing. Because I just
Mhm.
know that's a very slippery slope and can easily, um, the ego or the flesh can derail you, right? I want the gratification for this. No, it's always God's doing work through me and my clients, and they're doing the hard work. I just get to be an audience to it and kind of, offer
Mm.
guidance, but they're the ones doing the work, and ultimately God's providing the healing.
Yeah, that's such a good example to use the word audience. I have that same
Mm,
experience myself, right? Where the ego feels like I am doing this, the client is changing because of my words, versus being the audience, like sitting back and saying, like, oh, it's interesting to see how our relationship is the catalyst of this person, having a deeper
Mm-hmm.
understanding of themselves. It's a different way to look at life. And I think what I'm hearing you say is when you were younger, you were always sort of like aware of God and aware of,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
spirit, but more from a ritualistic, like if I do A, B will happen, right?
Yes.
Which sounds like, again, the good girl, the high achiever, like I'll do all the right things in the Catholic Church. And then when you really needed it, right? When there was no one else around, when you weren't having this crazy level of probably personal affirmation of what a good person you were, you thought like, okay, I can't just keep going out there and seeking this outer validation that just isn't sustainable. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to connect. I want to be in a community of people who are also humbling themselves, remembering,
Mm-hmm. Right.
the truth of what's really happening, which is we're both humans and spiritual beings, right? And that as you got closer to that, it brought you to some beautiful things, your husband, your new family, and also
Mm-hmm.
deciding you wanted to be a counselor, I'm guessing. Like, how did that
Yes.
go for you? Yeah. How did this start
Yeah.
informing your life?
Um, yeah, I mean, being around other people, like you said, humbling themselves and wanting to grow closer to God, obviously can motivate you to do the same. And like you said, you just see, hey, I'm not doing this perfectly. Great, nobody else is, right? We're all working on it together, trying to
Mhm.
understand God's will for our lives,
Yeah.
especially in your early 20s, right? Like that's the time where we had graduated college. We're all young professionals in Chicago trying to navigate things, being in a city that's not very much, not that it's not Christian friendly, but and being in a city environment is a lot of earthly and worldly and
Yeah.
cultural pressures, right? From every
Yeah.
angle. You
Yeah.
experience that anywhere, but especially
Yeah.
in a metropolis place.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I'm just so grateful that I got to dig into that at that point in my life. And um, I worked at nonprofits right out of college that were wonderful experiences, and I loved what I did. I mean, when I graduated from undergrad, I just knew I wanted to help people, and I didn't know exactly in what way. And so I worked in the nonprofit space and felt like I was making an impact there. But I just felt like there was something else I needed to. I always had wanted to go back to grad school, but didn't know for what, right? So it's not like undergrad where you can kind of go to a liberal arts college like I did and explore and figure out your major 2 years
Yeah.
in. And so I, did a lot of research on counseling. My jobs at the nonprofits was a lot of leading college students through service trips all around the country. So leading them through reflection exercises after our day of service, or preparing them to serve people with humility and compassion and empathy and things like that. And then
Wow.
serving, low income young adults trying to get job training and things. That's where the job I was at while I was in grad school. Um, and so I loved helping people. And then I started my own counseling in 2015, and it changed my life. And I
Hmm.
wanted to provide just a piece of that to others. And so I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to do that
Wow.
because, like I said, it changed my life. And that's what made me want to be able to help other people.
Yeah. And so how did you keep going and end up in grad school? I think we started what in 2019?
Yeah. Or was it both? Maybe. Oh, yeah, because we kind of fast tracked. So that's why we
Yeah.
graduated a little early. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you end up finally going to graduate school and saying, I want to be a counselor or maybe a Christian counselor? Like, I don't know what your thoughts were right then.
Yeah. It's so funny. I think back to our first day of class, and somebody asked me, when we were kind of all getting settled, what do you want to do like with your counseling degree? And I knew so little. I was like, I want to get my license eventually because I like wasn't super familiar with the field. And whoever it was like, okay, like other people had more of an idea of like, I want
Yeah.
to serve this population. I want to do this thing. I was very kind of naive to all of it. Um, but I had the inclination. I wanted to do either a counseling degree or social work. I actually reached out to people at my church at the time who were in those fields and talked to them. And from that, and I had a friend who was a social worker and just felt more pulled toward counseling. had my spreadsheet, did all my research of the programs in the Chicagoland area, and decided to go to Concordia. And then while we were in the program, just knew I felt very pulled towards working with people with addiction, because there's a history of that in my family of origin. And just, it's a privilege, I feel like, to just sit with people in their pain and also celebrate their triumphs. It's such a sacred space to be in. And I think especially in today's world, to have 50 minutes uninterrupted face to face or virtually with a client, nobody's on their phone, no distractions or anything. I feel like it is such a sacred, holy place to be. And so I'm grateful I get to enter that space a couple days a week, many times each of those days with clients, and to see those transformations happen, or to just help people through those tough times where there's not a lot to say and fix. It's just, hey, I'm here for you, right? You'll be able to get through this.
Yeah. And so, before we started recording, we were talking about there's different programs for addictions. Some include spirituality and some don't. And in your opinion, you did go into addictions counseling. I'm sure you brought up the word of God while you were in it. And so I'm just curious how important, or how you decided that, okay, if I'm going to go into this particular area of addictions, I think it's really important for this piece to be included. And so how did spirituality inform your therapy with people there, especially through addictions?
Yeah. Yes. So when I was finishing my hours for my degree, I was at a drug and rehabilitation center down here in South Florida. There are actually a lot of them down here. And I guess I can backtrack a little bit, just some background. When I was in college, I did a couple of internships with homeless outreach ministries, and one of them was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And a lot of people that worked at that outreach were in recovery. And I got to attend a church service where it was mostly everyone there was in recovery. Anyone was welcome. But the church service was actually based on the 12 steps. And I could just feel a different presence of God in that room. I felt those people clinging to God in a way that at a different church, people, it's like people show up, they sing the song, they say the prayer, they go home, right? You can never know what's going on in people's hearts. I'm not trying to judge, but I felt a different type of, clinging to God in that service like I never had before. People seriously crying out to God to stay sober for an hour, another day, another year.
Oh,
and
God,
so
hit my heart right there when you said that. Like, just feeling the desperation of people, like you said, just crying out, giving up, like this, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. And so then fast forward to, when I was working at the rehab center, they would take the clients to different 12-step meetings. And, the first step of any 12-step program is admitting you're powerless over your addiction, which I think, like I said earlier to you before we started recording, I think we all need to do in some aspect of our lives. The flesh, the ego is going to want to take over, right? And just get instant gratification through any means necessary. I led a spirituality group at that center as well once a week. And I would get a full spectrum of people, right? I mean, not only clients, some off the street, some very wealthy, but also just some who've walked with God for years, and some who'd never wanted to walk with God, and some who weren't sure where they were, right? And so it was always very interesting to enter that space with people and just say, hey, do you believe in anything outside yourself? Do you believe in anything greater than yourself? Even if you can't put a name on it yet, just what would that be for you? And I think that's so important for us all to do, because if we only rely on ourselves and we fail, well, then what do? We just beat ourselves up and get up and try to do better the next day, and it doesn't go well, right? Rather than identifying, hey, there's things I'm powerless over, or there's things my flesh is going to want that I know aren't good for me, and I have to pray to God, find healthy support, right, from Christian believers, pastors, whoever that may be, to help me get through this struggle. And so I think that within counseling, I mean, spirituality is a part of who we are and is an important thing to, explore. And so especially in the recovery space, um, once clients are fully willing to submit to the fact that they're powerless over this addiction and they can't just white knuckle their way through being sober by their own power, then they can become more open handed to receive what God has for them rather than saying, I have to do it all myself, and like
Yeah.
just struggling to not pick up or, not blow their life up again.
Yeah, I think that's so, before we close, I want to like hammer what you just said, because that to me is the reason to have a spiritually based addictions counseling is what you said. Like, what do you do if you are completely reliant on your atheist egoic self and it doesn't work, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you have left to do is beat up yourself. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's your only choice. And so
Yeah.
even if you don't believe in anything, even if you can't grasp, like, you can at least see the logic of that, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
totally what you said? And maybe you should say it better than I'm saying it, but just this idea of like, if you fail, then what do you have? You're just
Yeah,
going to
what do
be
you
subjected.
who do you turn to? Yeah.
Yeah, you're just
And
going
I
to be
want to say
subjected to
this
your
with
addiction.
the utmost compassion because I know that people have been battered by life, right? The Bible says we will have trials. It doesn't say
Yeah.
follow Jesus and all your worries go away. No, it
Really not,
often
because
talks about
he had nothing but problems after that.
right. Yes, it often
Yeah.
talks about how we will have trial and we
Mhm.
can overcome it by clinging to God's word, the truth of God, crying out to Him, praying to Him, being encouraged by believers around us. And so I know there are people who've experienced things addiction wise, non addiction wise, who say, I don't want to go into God's house, into the church. I'm too embarrassed. I don't want to talk to God, or I'm mad at God, right? I feel as though He
Blasphemy.
did certain things in my life that I don't know if I'll come back from, right? And obviously they're clinging to lies that, the enemy can be telling them, or they were taught things growing up in the church, right? Oh, if you just prayed more, you wouldn't have this problem, right? And so I would say it with compassion that if you're scared to explore spirituality, that's okay. It doesn't mean there isn't something out there outside of yourself. And, there are great options like Celebrate Recovery is a recovery program based on Jesus. So NA, AA are all based on the belief in a higher power. So you can fill that in as you will. But there's also Celebrate Recovery, where there's a lot of loving Christians who want to come around you and help you navigate any hurt, habit, or hang up that you have. So it's not just solely addiction. You can go there and work your codependency. You can go there and work your
Mhm.
spending addiction, overeating, or drug use, substance use, whatever the case is. But
What did
knowing
you call,
that
what were the 4 things you said? Hurt, habit,
hurt, habits, or hang-ups is
hurt,
how they
habit.
describe it. Yeah. So you can go there and work the Celebrate Recovery program for any of those things. Um, so
So
yeah,
is
it can
that
be scary for people to enter the counseling office or the church, right? But that doesn't mean I always like to say you don't grow inside your comfort zone. And again, that's where the flesh or the ego wants to take over. I don't need that help. I'm fine. Let's just stay here. And
yeah.
yet the only way you're going to find healing, hope, power is outside of yourself with God and with others that are giving you,
Yeah.
healthy counsel.
Yeah, so in closing, I know that you also work with people outside of the addiction,
Hmm.
recovery space. So did something like the hurt habits and hangups, the hurt and the habit or the hangups, is that why you started veering into helping people outside of addictions also? Like, what else does your practice do?
Yeah, I have a lot of experience treating anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, kind of a slew of things. I get a lot of adolescent female clients because the parents look at my picture and say, you look young enough to be cool still. So,
Yeah.
like, you see my daughter. And I, because I don't personally struggle with the disease of addiction, but I've had people in my family who do. And so I also loved getting to work with family members of the clients I had at the rehab center to come around them and offer psychoeducation. They weren't my clients, but we did family programming for the family members of the people that were in our program. And
Mm.
so just being able to help people, everybody's fighting that battle you know nothing about. I don't know who to quote that said that, but I love that phrase because everybody is trying to make it look like they're okay when they're really struggling, right? And all these different things are happening. And so, like I said, because counseling changed my life, I wanted to help others. And so just knowing that there are people out there that look like they have it all together, but they're really hurting on the inside, um, was my motivation for just wanting to branch out from that world as well, knowing that, and helping people also before they're in crisis. I love to. I love when
Yeah.
a client will say, think I'm okay, but I'm going down a slippery slope of like my anxieties keeping me up at night. Great. Let's get in before you're in crisis.
Yeah.
I just think every single person can benefit from the counseling process
Yes.
in some way to unpack stuff from their past, to address a crisis happening right now, or to prevent a crisis from taking place. And so I am so grateful to get to work with my clients and do the work that I do. To bring some kind of, you know, um, peace to their lives that they can find on their own through our work together.
Yeah. Well, and so after talking to you this short while, and seeing your growth just from knowing you as a student, right, is
Hmm.
there's two types of people I think that could benefit from talking to you. One is anybody in Florida, right? Because that's where you're
Yes, that's
in.
only where I'm licensed. Yes.
Yeah. But, someone like me in Illinois who wants to deepen their belief that Christian counseling or spirituality in counseling does make a lot of sense, and you've had victory around that, I think they could also be interested in reaching out to you.
Yeah.
How do people find you?
Yes, they can find me on my website, www.replenishrenew.com. They can email me, Maryann, Maryann, at replenishrenew.com, and contact me there. I'm on LinkedIn. Like I said to you before we started recording, I'm one of those weirdos who's not on social media. Um, I just don't partake. I don't think it's healthy for me. So, but they can find me on my website, or email me, or contact me through the phone number on my website. I'd be happy to connect with people, um, and offer my perspective and share with them about my experiences.
Nice. And so for LinkedIn, is that under your name or under your business name?
Yeah, that's under Maryann Dernlin, LMHC, for licensed mental health counselor. That's where they can find me on there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I so appreciate reconnecting and hearing your growth. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Win. Thank you for offering this space and allowing me to share. So good to see you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.